what is the ultimate purpose of the EIA? Not to get the environmental clearance, to be the sustainable development in and around. So ultimate purpose of the EIA is to that the people living in the project area and the people living inside around the project area should feel that this activity is going to sustainable with reference to employment as well as the environmental contract goal. I now request sir to give the
Ulu. Mike. Good afternoon. In the morning I spoke so much, so I really don't know whether I should speak again or not. I hope you will not get bored. We have evolved a different phrase now, that climate and environment sustainability. Here I have written environmental sustainability, but actually we have clubbed them together and we call it now climate sustainability, because sustainability automatically includes environmental concern. So this is our Center for Climate Sustainability and Skill Development. We did some programs recently and then you have some photographs of that. In the morning we were discussing whether there is one practical dimension of getting environmental clearance and there is another dimension of really protecting environment. Now we have to first decide which one do we want. We want the environmental clearance and we are really worried about the environment. Now if you really look at both these aspects, then the real scientific challenge before us today is to find out the ways and means of quantifying the following facts. Intricate interaction between climate change and environmental pollution, because temperature and humidity are two such factors which there is absolutely no physical, chemical, biological, biochemical, biophysical process which is not dependent on temperature and climate. And those who can recall their 12 standard days or intermediate days, that Charles' law, Boyle's law, if you remember, that there is absolutely no process on the earth which is not dependent on temperature. So you look at chemical kinetics also dependent on that, biological phenomena also dependent on temperatures. Temperatures rises slightly and you feel so uncomfortable. You wear a sweater when it is not desirable, you immediately want to put it off. So there is a very intricate interaction between climate change and environmental pollution, because all the pollution dynamics, dispersion, dilution, whatever you may deal with, they're all dependent on temperature and humidity. And their impacts in terms of human and ecosystem health. When we speak of quality of life, actually inherently at the back of our mind it is ecosystem and human health. We want to directly or indirectly quantify, and that gets reflected in terms of the quantification of quality of life. And I said unfortunately still they're very uncertain, because the way they have been developed and those in response evaluation, they still are beset with lot of uncertainties. So alterations in land cover, biodiversity, air, water and soil pollution and their implications on climate change impacts and on availability of food items and nutrients and vice versa, both are important. There's impact of environmental pollution and climate change impact on environmental pollution. Actually the situation is like this. Very few people globally realize that ecosystem works almost on the principles of electronics integrated circuit. There are positive feedbacks, there are negative feedbacks, and if you really go deep into the matter, you will find that many of the entities, ecological entities, actually they work like electronic components. For instance, I will tell you, you take one seed and put it on the land, sow it, then it develops into a plant, then becomes a tree, then so many fruits are born, and those fruits have seeds which will again convert into different trees, and then it's almost like amplifier. Similarly, many of the ecological entities have their roles as transistors, resistors, conductors, insulators. So it is basic. You have an environmental envelope of semiconductor physics going on, or integrated circuit. So all of them are interconnected. To view them or quantify them in isolation, to study them in isolation, is actually a parochial way of looking at the environmental pollution problem. So impacts of above mentioned alterations on disease transmission and dynamics. Ultimately the scenario is like this. You have climate change leads things like stratospheric ozone depletion, biodiversity loss and ecosystem function, then freshwater decline, desertification, land degradation, and through all these intermediate variables, how they are interlinked with each other. They're all interlinked. It's a feedback, it's a cycle. So to give a very simple example, if you look at the Earth system, there is absolutely no process which we see, especially temperature rise, solar radiation, goes up, comes down. Solar radiation starts from, say, this end, if you plot it on the y-axis with the x-axis as time, then it goes up, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, it is at the peak, then comes down, again the process is repeated. Most of the ecological processes are cyclic in nature because of these positive and negative feedbacks. Ultimately, when this happens, what happens? Climate change affects through regional, reflects through regional weather changes, heat waves, extreme weather conditions, temperature and precipitation intensities. They affect microbial contamination pathways, transmission dynamics, agroecosystems, hydrology, socioeconomics and demographics, which in turn have the following impacts: temperature related illness and death, extreme weather related health effects, air pollution related health effects, water and foodborne diseases, vector-borne and rodent-borne diseases, effects of food and water shortages, mental, nutritional, infectious and other health effects. So then there are issues related with the research needs in the area of adaptation and then health specific adaptation measures. So what are the research challenges at the moment before us? Research on climate change and health spans basic studies of cause-effect relationships. In the morning you saw Director was mentioning whether we are trying to establish cause-effect relationships or not. If cause-effect relationships cannot be bridged, then what kind of environmental management plan we can write? When there is a problem, we must be able to identify the sources of the problems, then only you can control, curtail the sources and will have the right appropriate environmental management plan for which you are aiming. Then exposure risk assessment, evaluation of population vulnerability and adaptive capacity and evaluation of intervention policies. So key questions before us are how climate change is affecting the ecosystem. What does this mean for species? What are the species specific responses? Do we know? Unfortunately in India we do not have those species response curves even by now. Then what does this mean for habitats or the communities? When we do not have species those response relationships, we certainly do not have the community response functions. Then what does this mean for communities and industries at large? And how do we evolve appropriate environmental management plans to deal with ecosystem adaptation and vulnerability? So you have different kinds of modeling skills as you can see in the top photograph. You have models for emission scenarios, you have models for global climate change scenarios, and you have health impact models. Then then there you have conversion to a single health measure that is called disability adjusted life year. So in short, viewing climate change merely as a change in temperature or humidity levels is a very narrow way of looking at the problem, which in essence has a much wider implication and ramification. When our body temperature rises, it's not that you can just put ice on the body and the temperature will come down. Body temperature is rising because there is some internal disturbance in our body. Similarly, in the ecosystem health also, if you have a temperature rise at somewhere, it's not somehow some temperature emission has taken place and which has given reason to that temperature rise. There's inherently something biophysically, biochemically or biologically or physically, chemically wrong somewhere, because of which the temperature of that particular portion on the land has risen, and which is reflected in terms of heat island effects, I think, which you may be very familiar with by now. Now, transmission and distribution of impacts under interactive and integrated influence of climate change and environmental pollution. It's an important area of research which helps in quantifying a human and ecosystem health risk. This also helps ultimately in converting them into the real economic terms, financial benefits accrued or costs incurred. Moreover, alterations and aberrations in temperature and humidity are very closely linked with significant perturbations in biogeochemical cycles. Whatever activity we are doing, whether it is industrial activity, commercial activity, residential activity, ultimately what it is affecting is the biogeochemical cycle. There's either carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, sulfur cycle, or phosphorus cycle, so on and so forth. And all these cycles are finally interlinked with each other. They do not work in isolation. So it is a bangle inside a bangle inside a bangle kind of a situation. One bangle gets broken. It's like, imagine a situation, mosquito net. If there is one hole also today, I think within a week's time you will have multiple holes. Or one hole is also sufficient to let many mosquitoes enter. So that kind of problem is happening when we have mindless land use alterations without understanding the impact of land use changes on our ecological system. Because anywhere we cannot construct a building, anywhere we cannot bring out an industry, anywhere we cannot make a market, but we are doing so. So we have to understand, unless until you have linked land use patterns with the biogeochemical cycles appropriately as a cause-effect relationships in terms of space and time, you will not be able to really quantify the problem in hand, and you will ultimately not be able to really understand the source of the problem. So what needs to be done? Investigation of relationships between atmosphere, hydrosphere and biosphere through their dependence on biodiversity and ecosystem processes. Assessment of climate change responses and impacts on habitats and various biotic processes. Estimation of likely long-term effects by way of developing appropriate qualitative and quantitative ecological models. Monitoring of ecosystem health and its quantification through appropriate ecological and health risk assessment models. For determining ecosystem health, the most sensitive and ecosystem specific parameters indicators will have to be initially selected. In the morning we had a discussion, like she was mentioning, you write a specific term of reference with respect to a particular kind of a project, but then EAC will ask you why did you do the other baseline data collection also. We are unnecessarily prolonging that whole EIA process. In fact, if you fill form 1 and form 1A, you will realize why you are being made to fill that. There has to be some implication, and the implication says most of the environmental impacts related to the industrial contributions can be quantified on the basis of that. Otherwise, why there is a need for doing that? So we are indulging in a redundancy kind of an exercise by making terms of reference, then filling up form 1 and form 1A also, and then finally not doing sensitivity analysis for the issue just pertaining to that particular industry and that particular specific reason. So for instance, wetlands and their ecological processes happen to be one of the most appropriate indicators of a region's ecological health, as the perturbations in either the terrestrial or the aquatic ecosystem is immediately reflected in the form of an environmental impact on the wetland. See, all over India, see, one population, that is frogs population, is decreasing. If you have observed in your area, there's an amphibian species. Amphibian species is basically one which is transmitting nutrients from land to water, water to land. Most of them, I'm just giving you the example of frog. Now list out how many such amphibian species have become extinct or their population has lowered significantly. That itself is an indicator that there is a significant perturbation in that region specific area. And then that the carrying capacity is gone. And then there is a cause for concern, and the alarm bells should ring. But are we really doing that kind of a science to really ascertain and quantify our impacts? We are, for whatever may be the project, whatever may be the reason, we are just following the same kind of dictum. When we go to doctors, two brothers suffering from the same symptoms, the doctor will prescribe different medicines. That's the doctor's medical environmental management plan. But when we do EIA, you see the same kind of baseline for all situations are done. During the breakfast time also we were discussing, these are redundancies which can be removed. So some sample contributions I will just tell you. This is one health risk assessment model which we had developed. This was way back in 2005, I think. Aditya Swami was that time there. He was remembering that when he came for his first assessment, I asked some questions probably to him. So during those days, these exercises were done. But because of data limitations, many of these exercises could not be carried out further, because who will sponsor the data collection on issues like this? Everyone is in a hurry for environmental clearance. Who has the time for sponsoring a scientific investigation which will give you a realistic picture which is desirable? So we did this exercise, but we stopped. We started doing some more different exercises. This was a paper we published on health exposure assessment and policy analysis way back in 1993. Because this learning had helped in publishing that paper in 2005. So I had a strange kind of relations with environmental impact assessment division. I worked for 2 years, and then I will concentrate on some other issues, and then I will do again on some specific projects, because my interests were different. I will not work on any project which is of general nature. It has to be generating some specific interest. So I was part of the carrying capacity study for Doon Valley region, for carrying capacity studies for National Capital region, and then regional carrying capacity for Jamshedpur region for TISCO we had done. Then we had some work done for development of a dynamic and predictive model for ecological footprinting. Ecological footprinting also can be a surrogate measure of quantifying environmental impact assessment, because in one go it converts all the environmental impact in the land unit, which everyone can understand. The story of environment is actually a story of 7 blind men and an elephant. We belong to different disciplines, and then we look at environment from different angles. For those who have not read this story is like this. There was an elephant, and there were 7 blind men who were asked to describe the elephant. So those 7 blind men touched different organs of the elephant, and the organs which they touched, accordingly they describe the elephant. So someone feels elephant is like the big legs it has, someone feels it's like the trunk, someone feels it is like elephant's teeth. Similar stories with the environment. A physicist's perspective is different, a biologist's perspective is different, a civil engineer's perspective is different, an electronics engineer's perspective is different. But actually, if you really want to manage environment, electrical engineering and electronics engineering perspective will help you best. Because when we look at compensatory afforestation, all the trees are living beings, and just imagine a situation: you kill 100 people somewhere, and then say some more 200 children are born somewhere else. 100 people killed in Nagpur, 200 children born in Chandrapur. Does that really solve the problem? Similarly with the trees, you uproot trees from one area, and then say from Chandrapur we uprooted 1,000 trees, but we planted that in Delhi or Nagpur or so. Is it really a solution? Because when you treat trees also as living beings, are you really entitled to do that kind of a treatment to them? But this is an ideal situation. We really cannot develop if we really adopt this ideal situation. And the practical solution is cut trees and grasses, weeds everywhere. We have not understood the community associations in terrestrial ecosystem also. For instance, when we were doing monitoring for Doon Valley, what we had found is there is one tree called Sal, and the other was Rohini. Whichever forest you go, Sal and Rohini will always be found together. So like us, even these terrestrial species keep families, and then you move with the families. You remove a member of the family, and the impact is totally different. Then there are associations with different tiers of vegetation. You have shrubs, herbs, weeds and all. Along with the plant, they have a different kind of an association. Unless until we understand that those associations and intricacies of interactions, how can we really do compensatory afforestation elsewhere? But have you really understood? Is there a botanist in India also, or world over for that matter, who can really quantify these associations? And if you cannot quantify that association, what kind of green development design or a plan you will do? So these are some intricate issues, ecological issues, which have to be understood before we mindlessly advocate some environmental management plans. And we have to choose between what is practically possible and what should ideally be done, and then take that optimum route for our environmental management plan. So these are the developments. Ecological footprinting, actually this must be one of the few papers on dynamics of ecological footprinting. They talk of ecological footprinting, but that is static. We had developed a dynamic model for that. Then there was for long, they talked about how do we quantify environmental water demands. I think this must be the first paper which quantified environmental water demand. And we did it for Odisha, forest zone and Gujarat, one dry area and the one humid area. So most of the policy and planning documents have either remained silent or have made only implicit reference to environmental water demand. This is the first attempt for quantifying EWD, modeling application for two distinct Indian ecosystems, dry and moist. Climatic role of forests, I think it need not be reinforced, because by now, as someone was saying in the morning, even children are aware of the role of environment. And believe it or not, most of the time, environment and trees or forests are synonymous. Mostly people feel environmental problem, that means the problem of the forest. And there is another strange obsession, which I recently myself realized. Why do we call environmental attempts green attempts? Does environment have only green color? The flower is red. I think most of you are holding red flowers. So flower is red. Ocean is blue. Rivers are blue. We have all the colors. It's a rainbow. But we are obsessed. Green mechanism, green methods, green chemistry, green engineering, green physics. Physics luckily still is not green. It will all the time. I think we are living among those strange phrases we don't understand also. But someone has coined, so we are blindlessly, globally, internationally following those kind of concepts. We have to come out of that. We have to learn to realize, is it really worth for the problem which I am trying to seek solution? So this you can see the intricacies of environment here in this diagram. Then there are so many issues related with climate change, vegetation dynamics, landscape. Ideally what we should do, there was a discussion during the breakfast time, why for the same reason all the industries are asked to create a baseline that scenario. All the regions should have just called ecosystem health report cards. And with whatever industrial interventions we are likely to have, should just quantify what is that it is going to add to what was earlier there, positive or negative. It should be as simple as that. But we do not have any national ecosystem health report card. This needs to be generated. And if the industries can jointly, like they go for combined effluent treatment plants, if they can jointly sponsor those industries situated in a particular area, I think NEERI will be able to take up that job and create environmental health report cards for those regions, so that it will avoid that cumbersome exercise on the part of various industries to again collect the same kind of redundant data, which is not so meaningful to do. Then this shows the comparison of footprints. Ideally, we should follow an industrial ecology concept. That's the best environmental management plan we should have. But is it possible? That has to be investigated, because if the waste of one industry becomes the resource for the other industry, there is nothing like that. Then your waste management efforts automatically get minimized. But to do that requires extensive scientific and technological research. But this is the best solution for any reason. Once we have generated ecosystem health report cards, and if we really want to have an environmental management plan, we should follow industrial ecology principles and then prepare that plan accordingly. This will help all the industries in that region, because then your additional interventions will only need to be quantified in terms of the additional input perturbations. And then that source apportionment can be done. This industry A will add to the perturbation by this amount, B will have this kind of contribution, C will have this kind of a contribution. So you can tax industry A like this, B like this, and C like this. It will become so simple if we all sit down in a coordinated way and evolve a combined strategy, like common effluent treatment plants. Unfortunately, even CETP did not become successful, but then we can, unless until we make an attempt, we cannot really make a dent in the present environmental impact assessment exercise. And let me tell you very frankly, so many EIA reports we have seen, has environment of any place in India improved from what it was yesterday? That means we are moving in a wrong direction. And there is a strong need for correcting our steps. We must change that direction. And if you really want to have a significant impact, then you must not only change but revamp the entire exercise. And do it in terms of ease of business. In terms of ease of business, you may totally demolish the whole exercise which is going on and create a new kind of a system which will be more meaningful like this. So this is what I'm trying to show. So methodology which we have followed through all our modeling exercises like this, literature review, without that we cannot go ahead, selection of appropriate ecosystems for detailed analysis and data collection, identification of important issues and problems of the region, identification of sensitive hotspots for deeper analysis, selection, development, calibration and application of models, development and application of appropriate functionalities for region-specific and site-specific issues, impact on ecosystems and human health due to climate change and pollution interactions, quantification of process interlinkages which will help in evolving appropriate region-specific environmental management plan, and finally report preparation. So impact on terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, evaluation of impacts of alternative land use management using biogeochemical and ecological models, impacts of climate change on industrial, commercial and residential zones, impact on ecosystem health, evaluation of adaptation strategies and impact of acid rain on both the kinds of ecosystems. This kind of auditing, environmental auditing must be done to evolve realistic region-specific environmental management plans. We must identify, we have processes like industrial, commercial, residential and agricultural processes. They can be subdivided into various sub-processes, and all these sub-processes individually and cumulatively what kind of impacts they have on air, water, land, socio-economic and biological environment that needs to be quantified. Then only our environmental management plans will be effective. So this is the process, kind of process specific exercise which needs to be done. And these are some general slides which help you understand some indicators for ecological and carbon footprints. Actually, IPCC also finally came to the conclusion that most of our environmental and climate change related problems are basically because of our lifestyle problems. So if every individual decides to reduce his or her ecological and carbon footprint, we will have significant contributions already. Because as Mahatma Gandhi said, that enough for everyone's need, but not enough for even a single man's greed. If we become so greedy, we are not able to understand and estimate our real requirements, then how are we really going to manage the environment? Every entity which we need, this one, everyone has got carbon and ecological footprint. At every step, it needs to be minimized, and we will be automatically able to take care of it. This slide I am just purposefully showing you. This was the PCPI conceptual master plan, but I think we were in all for some time, and I think again this thing is not going on. But here you can see essentially it is a land use allocation problem in amongst different kinds of activities. That has to be rationalized, that has to be optimized for evolving appropriate environmental management plans. And this slide shows you the intricacies of various kinds of environmental managements. You have emissions, dispersion, transformation, deposition, and various ecosystems interlinked with each other. And then you further go look at it from the microscope, the diagram gets more complicated. So we have to decide at which level we must compromise and stop. So the imbalance between emissions and sinks. Forests which are very effective filters or sinks for many GHGs, mainly CO2 are continuously being cleared for various agricultural, residential, commercial, industrial purposes. You will realize that total land on the earth is finite. Like elastic, it cannot be increased. It can decrease because of the erosion at the coastal zones also and the mountain zones. So the continuous erosion can only decrease. The same land has to be allocated to the following activities: industrial, commercial, residential, aquacultural, forestry and agriculture. Same land. Now, if you have defined the word for development as industrial expansion, that means you require more and more land for industries. And once you require more and more land for industry and industries will manufacture something, you will require more and more land for commercialization, because something is manufactured, it has to be sold, and then you will offer employment to people for the industrial activity and for the commercial activity. So more land for residential activity. Now the land demands for commercial, industrial and residential activities are continuously and exponentially rising. Now from where that land will come? Either from the forestry area or from the agriculture area. Whatever the data you may see, or most of the data also corroborate that the forests are almost at the gone stage. Now that land will come from agricultural zone only. Now if the continuously and exponentially land is drawn from agricultural zone, can you expect potato prices to come down every day? So does it require a Nobel Prize winner to come and tell us that potato prices will come down? Will always go up, because agricultural land is becoming limited. So look at that balance. So you have to decide, like when you make sabji, there is a ratio: oil, haldi or masala, whatever, and salt. A particular ratio. Suppose 1 milligram of salt makes your sabji very tasty. Now does it mean that if you put 10 milligram, the sabji will become 10 times tastier? There is a particular ratio which has to be established. Optimization. Same kind of ratio runs us, that is CNP ratio, carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus ratio. Similarly, for the development, we should have a ratio for commercialization, industrialization and residential activity. Unless until we optimize that ratio, we will not get anywhere. So just by development we mean if you have constructed 10-kilometer road, you are developed by X. You construct 100, then you are developed 10X. That's the conventional notion of development at this moment. Is that really right to look at development in that way? So we have a strong need for redefining and redesigning our development paradigms. Otherwise, we will not be able to tackle the pollution problems. Then this results in doing away with one of the most effective sinks of pollution and consequently enhances GHG buildup in the atmosphere. Mainly because of these reasons, pollution concentrations today are much higher than what they were several decades and centuries back. And let me tell you another fact. We have technologies, no doubt about it. From India to America, we have great technology, environmental technology, this technology, that technology. But while technology is solving your problem in terms of milligrams, you are generating pollution in terms of trillions of tons. So can you ever match that rate? The rate of degradation is 10 to the power 9 of the rate of assimilation of environmental rectification. So you can imagine where we are leading. And if you don't believe me, look at all the landfill sites in all the major cities and you will find out that what kind of ratio that is, which I have told you now. Sustainability should mean simple harmonic motion. What goes up, sun rises, sun sets in the evening. You cannot have the sun rising all through. It will become very boring and maybe strenuous for you. And that gentleman who asked you about the impact of light on air system is very right. But we are stressing stomata unnecessarily during night hours. Stomata, which is responsible for absorbing air pollutants including carbon dioxide, never gets to sleep. Is it a good ecological situation? If you are not made to sleep for 2 days continuously, third day many of us will end up with mental hospital. Similarly, the way we are teaching ecological entities, so that gentleman was very right in asking that question. You put this light on, that means your stomata is all the time open, it is photosynthetically active. Is that the kind of sustainable development we want? So sustainable development is one, we should Earth, our Earth, there is nothing more than Earth, and there's the mother of us. If you look at it, it's not a spirituality, it is real scientific fact. Whatever is existing on the Earth, biotic or abiotic, is actually because of the interaction between sun and Earth. Whichever religion you may belong to, but there are two gods right in front of you. The sun god and the mother Earth. And it's because of the interactions between these two that we are here. We are here, abiotic, biotic substances, all are there. Now, imagine a situation, you go on developing Earth. Or you change the rate of its movement. It will be an universal catastrophe. Your speed does not determine your development. Your mass does not determine your development. Imagine a situation, I am weighing some 60-70 kg today, tomorrow I start weighing 250 kg. Is it my development? So mass does not determine development, speed doesn't determine development. Do we know what is development? Ask yourself. Many of us really do not know what is development. You ask them to define what is development. They do not know, but everyone is trading the path of development. Where are we going? We must question ourselves. This diagram shows you the measure of resilience and measure of resistance. For every ecosystem function, we should have that, and that should give the right environmental impact assessment. In terms of ecosystem resistance and ecosystem resilience, how we are performing is the environmental health part of the reason. And look at this diagram. You don't need to do any data collection. You can yourselves tell whether they have exceeded carrying capacity or not. Do you need some data collection for that? Why are we wasting our money in baseline data creation when the situation is right before? So we must know where there is a need for data collection, where there is a need for immediately stopping, where there is a need for going ahead. So these demarcations have to be done. This is, incidentally, this is Bombay mangrove 15 years back. It must have worsened only, let's see. Okay? So similarly, Lake Chad in 2001 satellite image with the actual lake in blue and vegetation on top of the old lake bed in green. Above that, the changes from 73 to 97. So you can yourself see the changes. Most of the lakes have undergone the same fate. Their fate is not different. This is the path of development we are following. Bombay in its backyard. This is Bombay city, the commercial capital of India. Imagine our backs start looking like this. How will we? National capital region. In 1994, it was like this. It must have become worse only. Dehradun. What is desired or what it was is what it was is in the right side. The same place, totally denuded forest. Also around 2000 photograph. Mumbai mangroves I have already shown. This is our Taj city, Agra city. So see whether we need to do some baseline collection. Same city, we did some work for past pages, and This is food chain interlinking environment with living beings, how they are living and how the different diseases can transmit. So the conclusion is future exercises are needed which should aim at the dynamics of ecological footprints. Analysis of environmental risks by way of developing models which deal with the issues like temporal and temperature risk gradients and ecological economics of natural resources. There is also a need for quantifying region-specific emission factors for different GHGs and other environmental pollutants so that it will minimize the baseline data collection and money and time therein. On the basis of these emission factors, region-specific ecosystem health and human health risk assessment can be carried out. What we urgently need to do is to put the right technology and right amount of money at the right place at the right time. And if we cannot do it, the right solutions will keep on eluding us. The simplest and the best example is the train. Look at its different components and compartments and then look at the way they are coupled with each other. A slight error can cause derailment, and even look at the tracks, the fish plates, so on and so forth. And then look at the ecosystems, and finally look at our perpetual train that is our Earth system, how it moves, what are its different components and compartments, where are the tracks and where are the fish plates. Let us try to locate them, then only we can manage the system. So we have to work for a compromise between human development and ecological footprint. These are some of our international associations. I was once upon a time the coordinator for CSIR Global Climate Change Program. Then we had some Indo-US collaboration, climate change and health. Then we had some atmospheric ground cloud scientific investigations. This is Dr. A.P. Mitra, who was our ex-Director General of CSIR. He was the climate change figure. And ideally he should have got the Nobel Prize for climate change. But you know, marketing is a different scale. So there are some other associated photographs. In the period that Einstein was active as a professor, one of his students came to him and said, the questions of this year's exam are the same as last year's. Many times we encounter these kind of situations in ESCs, you know. True, Einstein said, but this year all answers are different. So knowledge changes with time. We have to keep track of time. That's why this training program is here today, because we have to keep on updating our academic resources. It has been left to our generation to discover that you can move heaven and earth to save 5 minutes and then not have the faintest idea what to do with them when you have saved them. And one of my medical friends told me the most of the problems, environmental or otherwise, are problems related to hurry, worry and curry. Most of the time, hurry, worry and curry. These three are responsible for most of the problems we are having. You can accordingly modulate your environmental management plan also in terms of these parameters. To get all there is out of living, we must employ our time wisely, never being in too much of a hurry to stop and sit life, but never losing our sense of the enormous value of a minute. That's very important. So we had some environmental awareness program. I had an interview. Environmental clearance must not be treated as a license to damage it. So I think we have to be careful. Finally, it is the way you look at any problem. A matter of pain can suddenly become a matter of pleasure, so you can understand. But yes, it's the way you want to live life. There are some awards and honors which we got. Thank you very much. I think that's the end of my story. If there are any questions, I will be glad to answer.
Sir, I feel in country like India, there's a lot of gap between the policy makers and the scientific community.
Right.
There had to be amalgamation of these two.
Yeah.
Scientific community as such has to come put forth their ideas with the implications to these policy makers, and they should sit together and then formulate the policy. What is not happening at present.
Yeah.
So such a thing should come to the, should go to the right forums, like prime ministers, wherever such kind of thing should go to the forums, so that we have a kind of evolving and rethinking approach.
Yeah, but you know, yes sir, actually you have rightly identified the problem. That's the problem. But the human problem is like this. long time back when I was in 8th standard, I had read a poem which you will appreciate in this context. The poem was like this. It was by Janki Vallabh Shastri. लाज लजाती जिसकी कृति से धृति उपदेशक हुआ है, मतलब जिसके कारनामों से लाज भी लजा जाती है वो दूसरों को उपदेश दिया करता है। तो कई बार चीजें जो बनाई जाती हैं, जो नियम वगैरह वो फॉलो करने के लिए जो बना रहा है, he is himself not aware of those implications. That's the whole problem. That's really a problem. So one who is making the policy is not aware of the scientific revelation.
They do not have the understanding.
Correct. And one who knows this doesn't have the power to make the policy. He can only deliver lectures.
Where industries stand in between.
So that has to be done. I think, but then this feedback, as director had also pointed out in the morning, this feedback, if it comes from you, you write to him directly, then we will collate this feedback, and then accordingly, then maybe NEERI will write a white paper on that, and then we will see how we can influence the policy makers in this area. That's really a great problem.
Sir, as in the morning in my presentation also I asked for risk-based approach, EIA. As you said that earlier it was happening, like health risk and all those things were, part of EIA.
Move on to the mic to our son.
So that health risk, estimation of health risk and environmental risk was a part of EIA report. Now it is not there, even if we go through NEERI reports, it is not there. So why you just remove that thing?
You have asked a very
I just want to add one more thing. Like recently, this ISO 14000/2015, it is talking about the risk-based approach for everything, okay, for quality management system as well as for environmental management system. And in company like Reliance, we have made some partnership with British Petroleums and all. So they have an operating management system, they are following that. And now, since they are our partner, we also need to follow the same. Their approach is this only, that what you have explained.
Yeah.
Now, I think there must be some limitation in India, like from policy front or from the industries, that the requirement of this type of study was not there. Maybe so you eliminate those things from EIA report. But now I think it is required.
Yeah.
And definitely in coming years, people will ask you to put this type of analysis, especially health risk analysis or this environmental ecosystem analysis, that would be required.
Yeah.
Because simply baseline data collection and that will not make much. And
the question is whose health? The question is whose health I am using. Is it human beings alone or even the plants and the animals?
That is ecosystem.
Yeah.
So there has to be balance.
Yeah.
Like this he has raised, I will give you another story. When I started the exercise in this institute, that was a developing a computer simulation model for predator-prey relationship. Actually, if you look at it, most of the environmental pollution problems are because of the predator-prey imbalance. The exercise was like this. I had to develop a computer model, and you have some foxes in the forest, and then you have some rabbits in the forest. The foxes survive on the rabbits. So 5 foxes, some 50 odd rabbits. The foxes are eating the rabbits. By the time they eat away some rabbits, some more rabbits are born through reproduction exercise. So the ecosystem balance is there. One day, most of the foxes become very greedy. So they decide and they find very fleshy and tasty rabbits, so they eat away all the rabbits. They did not realize that eating away the rabbits is finally their own suicide only. So they are not left with any food. Now the situation which I cited, the relationship between industry and agriculture is that kind of a relationship. Fox and rabbit relationship. Relationship between vegetation, aquatic product and the terrestrial ecosystem product and human health is that kind of an exercise. So we have to come to that balance point. The identification of that balance point, that so many rabbits carrying capacity, finally it's carrying capacity only, would be required for the survival of the foxes. So even if you have the foxy situation in the society, even for their own survival, rabbits are needed. That's that ecological balance. Unless until we have that, quantifying environmental impact has no meaning at all. Everyone knows that if you have more emissions, obviously more impact would be there, because air constitution is well defined. Oxygen, CO2, N2 ratio has to be of a particular kind to be able to breathe. So once you have more emissions, obviously this ratio will get disturbed. So everyone knows that it will have an impact. But then without quantifying the balance, how much can you disturb that ratio without the taste of your vegetable going bad? That has to be decided. And that cannot be decided unless until we generate those kind of environmental health cards. They are a must, and doing baseline data collection for all the industries separately is a meaningless exercise. Then you will spend all your time resolving those conflicts only. ONGC will go and collect for the same region different kind of a data. Reliance will go and collect for a different kind of a data. Then there will be a dispute in ESE. Those kind of situations will arise. Whereas if there is one agency which creates, like NEERI for that matter, no better agency than NEERI, creates that kind of a database, then the industries come with their inputs and quantify. That is how ideal EIA should be done. And irrespective of even NAVET issues, you have some issues here, even NAVET is also interesting issue.
Even it is good if they are disputing. The thing is that they are not seeing even.
Yeah.
Data is there, dispute is a separate case. If you dispute, we are at least we will be bothering about taking the data and conscious which data we are generating and what previous or other agencies have at least simulate those data, correlate to those data.
Yeah.
But the thing is that the industry objective, and right now very clearly what discussion was going on, it has to be between some agency like you and MOEM.
Correct.
Industry in between, if their objective is totally different, they are a commercial organization.
Correct.
So generating these type of data, if you ask for, we can provide financial assistance or anything it is required, we can provide. But generating this type of data for those who are not expert in this field, I think it's a futile exercise.
Yes. It has proved that it is a futile exercise because so many EIA reports, not a single site's environment has improved. That means all this exercise was futile. In one go it was futile. So there is absolutely no alternative. We have to go on a different path. And that has to be a totally different path.
Yeah. Whatever data is there,
Yes.
at least you give to NIC.
Yes.
You generate this type of project either through NEERI or through MOEM.
Correct. In association, 2-3 organizations.
One platform.
Yes.
At least you will evaluate what are the gap between those two.
Correct. At least there has to be a platform. Trains can be many, but platform has to be one. Yes. So that is true, no doubt about it. I fully agree with you. Actually, that was my intention behind showing this lecture was to generate this kind of a discussion on it. But then it has to start with the industries also, because you will be in a position to better advocate this process. We do not need environmental clearance. You need environmental clearance. So unless until that need for doing away with the earlier exercise and need for going ahead with a new exercise has to come from the industries, the stakeholders. Like if we say, they will say, NEERI just wanting to do increase its project budget. But if it comes from the industry, then it will make a better sense.
On part of MOEF also, preaching is different, practicing is different.
Well, that is an entirely different. For that we need psychologists and psychiatrists. This forum will not be. Harshvardhan, you want to say, give vote of thanks. Okay.
Sir, I think that we should start with our next presentation.
Okay.
Because we have to cover a lot of things. You have covered the umbrella. Now what is the under umbrella? We have to see that. Now I request Dr. M. Suresh Kumar. Please see, he is the head of our environmental impact and